My boss fired me over text at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The message was one sentence, no greeting, no signature. You're fired, effective immediately. I stared at it for a good 10 seconds, not because I was shocked he did it, but because I knew something he didn't. 3 hours earlier, I'd already sent everything to the board. I'm a numbers guy, so I tend to see events as timelines instead of moments. That text wasn't the beginning of my story. It was just the point where his version and mine finally split for good. My name's Daniel. I'm 32, and until that night, I was a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized tech company you've probably never heard of, but definitely use indirectly. We build the boring stuff, infrastructure, middleware, all the invisible plumbing that lets bigger logos pretend they invented the internet. The company likes to call itself a rocket ship. Internally, it felt more like a bus with half the wheels missing, rolling downhill on brand power and cheap coffee. My boss, Mark, loved that rocket ship line. He was the kind of manager who spoke in LinkedIn posts. "We're not here to do good work," he'd say in meetings, smiling like he'd invented pressure. "We're here to create a narrative." He wore the same uniform every day, slim fit blue suit, white shirt, brown shoes he kept perfectly clean. His hair never moved. His numbers did. When I joined 3 years earlier, I actually liked him. Or at least I thought I did. He was sharp, fast, and he noticed good work. On my second week, he pulled me into his office with that "I'm about to change your life" energy and said, "You're wasted just doing variance analysis. I need you closer to the real action." The real action turned out to be building decks for the executive team and massaging data until it looked like whatever growth story Mark had promised in his last meeting. At first, it didn't feel dirty. It was small stuff, choosing one chart over another, grouping months a certain way, changing labels from decline to temporary softness. Nothing technically false, just carefully angled. Every time something made me uncomfortable, Mark had a phrase ready. "Daniel, no one lies in finance," he'd say, leaning back in his chair. "We frame. The board doesn't want raw reality. They want direction." I told myself it was normal. Every company puts on makeup before they go out in front of investors. I watched colleagues nod along. I watched his boss, the CFO, skim our decks and say, "Looks good," without asking how we got there. I learned that, in our building, silence counted as approval. The first time he crossed a real line, it was subtle enough that I almost missed it. We were finalizing quarterly projections for a big customer who just signaled they might shrink their contract. Mark came over to my desk, one hand on his coffee cup, the other on the back of my chair. "These churn assumptions," he said, tipping his head at my screen. "Too conservative?" "They're based on historical behavior," I said. "If anything, I've been kind." He watched the numbers for a moment, then said, "What happens if we assume they renew at current volume?" I typed in the scenario. The forecast jumped. Revenue smoothed out, margins stayed pretty, and suddenly our rocket ship didn't look like it was losing altitude. "That's the story," he said. "Lock it in." I hesitated, but we know they're not renewing at that level. They literally said, "Daniel." His tone stayed calm, but his eyes didn't. "We're not submitting a legal affidavit. We're giving a directional view. Put it in the base case. If they downsize, we'll call it an adverse development next quarter." I stared at the screen. In my model, that one assumption flowed through everything. Revenue, hiring plans, bonus pools. It wasn't just a number, it was people's jobs. "Make it a sensitivity," I tried. "Base case with risk scenario." "No," he smiled. "You want to be in the room with the big kids? You have to learn the difference between might and will. Right now they might cut. That's not our problem until it becomes will." I ended up changing it. I still hate admitting that. I saved the file, uploaded the deck, and told myself I was overthinking it. That night, though, I went home and made a copy of the version with my original assumptions. I emailed it to myself from my personal account. Subject line: Backup. Pre-changes. I told myself it was just in case I needed to sanity check something later. I didn't call it what it really was, the first piece of evidence I kept. It didn't stop there. Once you compromise once, people feel it. They test the edges. Over the next months, little things started to stack up. Mark would edit my commentary before sending it to the CFO, changing phrases like below expectations to near expectations in a challenging macro environment. He'd ask me to clean up variance explanations by moving items between buckets so they looked less ugly when presented on one slide. I started noticing a pattern. Every time reality didn't match the story he wanted to tell, reality lost. And every time, I was the one touching the spreadsheets. In meetings, he made a show of praising me. "Daniel's our numbers guy," he'd say, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "I couldn't do what I do without him." People laughed. The CFO smiled. It felt good for exactly 3 seconds. Then, after the meeting, Mark would pull me aside and say things like, "By the way, don't send that full breakdown you showed me to legal. Strip out the experimental stuff. They'll just ask questions." If you've never worked in that kind of environment, it's easy to say, "I'd have walked out." I used to think that way too, before the mortgage, before the parents who needed help with their medical bills, before the job market that wasn't as friendly as headlines said. Quitting over a slide label felt dramatic, so I adapted. I pushed back in small ways. I annotated more, documented more. I slept less. The thing that finally snapped something in me wasn't even about money. It was about blame. We'd just finished a rough quarter. Reality caught up faster than Mark expected, and all the soft language in the world couldn't hide the fact that our margins were squeezed, and our sticky customers were suddenly less sticky. The board didn't yell, but the questions got sharper. After the meeting, Mark closed his office door and dropped his friendly face. "They're spooked," he said. "We need to be airtight next quarter. No surprises, no amateur hour." "Okay," I said. Then we stop smoothing things. We give them the real base case and build from there. He laughed, like I'd told a joke. "No, Daniel, we stopped making mistakes." He spun his monitor around. On the screen was a draft email to the CFO, half written. "Q2 forecasting errors," the subject line read. "Follow up on analyst performance." My name was in the first paragraph. I felt my stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. "What is that?" "A preemptive note," he said, "in case he asks. I'll tone it down, relax. But if there's heat, it can't sit on my desk. You're senior enough to own your models, junior enough that it doesn't stick to the executive team." He said it so calmly, like he was discussing seating charts. "That's not accurate," I said. I could hear my own voice flattening. "You approved every version. You changed assumptions yourself." He gave me a look I'd seen him use on vendors and junior staff. Patient, slightly bored. "Daniel, this is how it works. If you want to grow here, you have to be willing to carry weight. Sometimes that includes taking a bullet. I took plenty for my boss. Look at me now." I went home that night and didn't open my laptop for an hour. I just sat on the couch in the dark, listening to the hum of the fridge. My phone buzzed every few minutes with new emails, calendar invites, Slack pings. Somewhere between the third and fourth notification, it hit me with a kind of cold clarity. He wasn't mentoring me. He was positioning me, not as his successor, as his shield. I got up, grabbed my work bag, and pulled out my notebook. On the inside cover, I wrote a date and a single line. From today, everything gets documented. Then I opened my laptop, created a new folder on my personal drive, and started dragging things in. Emails where he'd changed numbers, versions of models with track changes, screenshots of Slack messages with "just make it look better" written in them. I wasn't fantasizing about revenge. I wasn't plotting some big movie moment. I just didn't want to be the only one in the room without a record when the music stopped. I didn't realize how fast things were moving against me until the morning Mark forgot to add me to a meeting I'd built the entire deck for. I walked into the office early as usual. The floor was quiet, half lit, screens still asleep. I opened my calendar and saw a glaring blank space where our weekly forecast review should have been. I refreshed twice. Nothing. 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps and laughter. Mark and the CFO heading into a conference room with printouts of my slides. I stood there for a second, feeling something tight settle behind my ribs. Not anger yet, something colder. When Mark returned an hour later, he acted surprised to see me at my desk. "Oh," he said casually, dropping the deck onto my keyboard. "We didn't need you in there. Couple of small questions, all handled." He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. The message was clear. You're not part of the conversation anymore. But that was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, my name started disappearing from threads I used to own. Emails that required my sign-off were suddenly finalized without me. When I asked why, Mark leaned back in his chair and said, "You've seemed overwhelmed lately. I'm helping you focus." Helping me, by cutting me out. What made it worse was how subtle he was. Nothing outrageous, nothing loud, just a series of small, precise incisions, quiet enough that if I complained, I'd sound paranoid. Then came the first real blow. A discrepancy showed up in one of our monthly cost reports. A minor one, a vendor classification error, something that should have been fixed in 2 clicks. Instead, the CFO forwarded it with a single line. "Why wasn't this caught earlier?" Mark replied first. Looping in Daniel. This was his area. He didn't even CC me until after he'd hit send. I opened the thread, reread it twice, felt heat rising up my neck. That report had gone through 3 revisions, all of them approved by Mark himself. My version had been correct. He was the one who moved items between categories to simplify the variant story. I scrolled through past emails. There it was. His note from 2 weeks earlier. Move vendor classification into Oppie's bucket. Cleaner narrative. I attached it quietly to my evidence folder. When I confronted him in his office, he didn't even flinch. "Daniel, no one's blaming you," he said. "But perception matters. Own the miss, fix it, and we move on." "But it wasn't a miss." He gave me a tired smile. "You're getting emotional. That's not how leaders operate." Something inside me finally clicked into place. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't a misunderstanding. He was building a paper trail, one where every flaw traced back to me. And then the real setup began. HR reached out just to check in. They used soft voices, non-threatening words. "We've heard there may be concerns about alignment. Some leaders feel communication has been inconsistent. Let's proactively support you before things escalate." I sat there listening to them recite pre-approved lines and realized they weren't offering support. They were documenting me, setting the stage for a performance plan that had probably been drafted already. That night, something in me stopped shaking. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't confused. I was studying the shape of the trap, and suddenly everything made sense. The late-night edits, the silent exclusions, the manufactured errors, the HR check-ins. He wasn't hoping I'd fail. He was arranging it. Because someone had to take the fall when his numbers finally caught up with reality. And he'd already decided who that someone was. I knew I needed more than screenshots and email chains. I needed something he couldn't twist, couldn't reframe, couldn't explain away. The opportunity came faster than I expected. We had a 1.1 scheduled 2 days later. Mark closed the door behind him, a bad sign, then sat across from me holding my last forecast in his hand, like it personally offended him. "This is too negative," he said. "Redo the churn assumptions." "They're accurate," I replied. "If anything, they're optimistic." He leaned in, voice low. "Daniel, I need you to listen carefully. We are not presenting a downturn to the board. Not now. Adjust the numbers, make them fit the direction we've communicated." I kept my expression still. My phone lay on the table between us, screen down, camera off, recording quietly in the background. One-party consent. Perfectly legal. "I can't change actual data," I said. "You're not changing anything," he said sharply. "You're reframing for strategic clarity." God, do I have to spell this out? We're smoothing. Everyone does it. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He filled the silence himself, irritated by my stillness. If the board sees a dip, they'll start asking questions we don't have answers for. So fix it, or I'll have to escalate concerns about your readiness for this level of responsibility. There it was, clean, undeniable, on record. When the meeting ended, I walked out calmly, heart pounding but hands steady. I went to the restroom, splashed water on my face, looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see a scared employee anymore. I saw a man who finally understood the rules of the game he'd been forced into. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off, listening to the recording through earbuds. Every word was clear, every threat precise. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to control. And I didn't know it yet. But that decision, pressing record, would cost him everything. The week everything unraveled didn't start with drama. It started with silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. I came in Monday morning and found my badge still working. But my system access changed. Half my folders were suddenly restricted. Shared drives I'd maintained for years now showed a gray lock icon. I tried to open one of the forecasting models. Permission denied. It doesn't make those changes by accident. I stared at my screen, realizing Mark was closing the walls before he made the final move. By noon, the pressure campaign began. He sent 3 emails in a row, all with timestamps suspiciously close together. Need updated revenue forecast ASAP. Legal wants revised language. Please remove all negative directional commentary. Where is the corrected churn model? None of those tasks had been assigned to me previously. None were on my plate that morning. He was creating a narrative. Daniel is behind. Daniel is dropping balls. Daniel is the problem. I felt irritation building in my chest, but I didn't respond emotionally. I documented everything, including the fact that the files had been locked by his access level at 7:12 a.m., long before those emails arrived. Then later that afternoon, the CFO's assistant messaged me privately. "Hey, heads up. There's a special board session tomorrow. Mark is presenting without the full team." Presenting what? I hadn't been asked for updated numbers, which meant he was using my models, the manipulated versions he'd edited himself, and positioning them as mine. He was accelerating the scapegoat timeline. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, but this time my hands weren't shaking. My laptop was open, tabs lined with evidence, emails, screenshots, the audio file from our 1-1, calendar invites, Slack threads. Every breadcrumb he'd dropped, I had collected. I opened the company's compliance training portal and scrolled down to the section everyone clicks through without reading. Near the bottom was the line I remembered. Concerns regarding financial integrity or executive misconduct may be submitted confidentially to the Independent Audit Committee or its designated external counsel. There was a dedicated email address, a secure upload link, step-by-step instructions. I followed them exactly. The dossier I attached wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry. It was organized, time-stamped, referenced. I laid out every manipulated assumption, every instruction to clean up numbers, every attempt to shift blame. I included the audio recording, the access logs, the original version of the forecast he'd overwritten. Then I wrote one final line. I am not requesting any action beyond an independent review. I simply want an accurate record before decisions are made based on inaccurate or altered data. I hit send at 8:39 p.m. For a moment, nothing happened. Then 10 minutes later, a new email appeared. Not from HR, not from Mark, but from outside counsel. "Mr. Reed, we acknowledge receipt of your submission. Do not delete or alter any documents. Do not discuss this matter internally. We will contact you shortly." No panic, no drama. Just procedure, the kind that means you've been taken seriously. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Don't come in tomorrow." My first reaction wasn't fear. It was almost disbelief at how predictable he'd become. He had no idea the board now had the original files. No idea outside counsel had already acknowledged the investigation. No idea firing me wasn't just retaliation. It was documented retaliation. I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. Let him think he'd won. The next morning, I drove to the office out of habit. My badge didn't work. Expected. While I was turning to leave, one of my coworkers, Jenna, rushed over. "Daniel, did you hear?" she whispered. "It is crawling all over our shared drives. They locked half the exec folders." "Really?" I said, keeping my voice steady. She nodded. "Mark's been in back-to-back meetings with legal since 8. CFO looked like he saw a ghost." I thanked her and walked away before she could ask anything else. By noon, rumors were spreading. Closed-door calls with the board. Sudden requests for document preservation. Finance leaders pulled into fact-finding discussions. And then something happened that told me the ground had truly shifted. HR called, not my usual rep, the head of compliance. "Hi, Daniel. We would like to understand your situation. Could you come in for an informal chat?" I kept my tone polite, calm, controlled. I've already been instructed by outside counsel not to discuss internal matters with anyone except their team. A pause, then a careful, "Of course, understood." That was the moment I knew. They no longer saw me as the problem. They saw me as evidence. Later that evening, a new email appeared. Investigators requesting a formal interview. No drama, no warmth, just professionalism. They wanted timelines, details, files. I gave them everything. Clean, precise, verifiable. Meanwhile, the company was cracking at the seams. Jenna texted me updates. Mark canceled all his meetings. IT disabled his access for a bit. He was furious. CFO just walked out of a room looking sick. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. 2 days later, the investigators sent one more instruction. "Do not respond to any further communication from your manager. The termination text is under review." I sat there reading that line again and again, letting it settle in my chest like a weight finally being lifted. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt something close to vindication. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. Earned. Mark had spent months constructing a trap around me. He didn't notice I'd quietly built a door in the back wall, and the moment he hit, "You're fired," he locked himself inside it. By the time the board stepped in formally, the office felt like a machine running without oil. Grinding, overheated, barely holding together, and for the first time in months, none of that weight was on me. I wasn't allowed in the building anymore, but I didn't need to be. The chaos carried itself. On Wednesday morning, the investigators scheduled my full interview. We met in a neutral conference room at a downtown law office. Clean carpets, white walls, a jug of water on the table. 2 attorneys sat across from me, one taking notes, the other reading my dossier like she'd already memorized half of it. "Walk us through the timeline," she said. I did, calmly, precisely. Everything backed by documents. Dates, versions of models, Slack messages, Mark's recorded instructions. They didn't interrupt often. They didn't challenge the story. They didn't need to. The evidence was all there, pivoted neatly against his own actions. When we finished, the lead attorney closed the folder, gently like she was sealing a verdict. "That was extremely helpful, Mr. Reed. Please do not delete anything. We may contact you if the board requires additional confirmation." Not if they investigate, not if they consider action, if they require more confirmation. When I left the building, I stepped into sunlight that felt unfamiliar, warm in a way that didn't carry dread behind it. Meanwhile, inside the company, the ground was shifting. Jenna sent messages sparingly, careful not to overstep. But what she did send painted a clear picture. Mark's office door has been closed all day. It wiped his admin privileges. He yelled at someone. CFO and legal were in the conference room with the audit chair for 3 hours. People are whispering your name, but not in a bad way, more like connecting dots. By Friday, HR sent me a formal notice. Your termination status is currently under review. Please refrain from responding to prior messages. The text Mark fired me with, the text he probably thought would end everything, had become part of the case against him. The following Tuesday at exactly 9:02 a.m., the announcement went out. I didn't see the internal email myself, but 3 people forwarded it to me within minutes. Effective immediately, Mark Ellis is no longer with the company. We thank him for his service. An interim leadership structure will be communicated shortly. No praise, no soft landing, no pursuing other opportunities. Just a clean corporate execution, the kind they reserve for people whose mistakes could cost the company millions. But what came next mattered more. At 10:15 a.m., I received a call from HR and legal together. Their tone wasn't adversarial this time. It was measured, respectful. Daniel, the board reviewed the circumstances surrounding your termination, the HR director said. They've concluded it was not valid. You are considered an employee in good standing. She paused, then continued. You have 2 options. You may return under a new reporting structure, or you may accept a separation package with a neutral to positive reference and compensation reflecting the period of disruption. The board wants this resolved in a way that supports your future. I didn't answer immediately. I asked for the offer in writing. A realistic request, one they agreed to without hesitation. When the documents arrived, they were thorough, clear, clean, no traps hidden between lines. That evening, I sat in my apartment with the paperwork in front of me, the room quiet except for the hum of my air purifier. Returning would mean a paycheck and stability, but staying would also mean walking the same halls, where I'd learned to shrink myself for someone else's comfort. I didn't want that. The next morning, I signed the separation agreement, not out of anger. That emotion had burned out weeks earlier, but out of certainty. The investigator's letter confirmed I'd acted appropriately. My record would stay intact. My reference would be safe. 2 weeks later, I accepted an offer at a different firm, a smaller company, less glamorous, but honest in a way my old job hadn't been in a long time. During the interview, the hiring director asked why I'd left my previous role. I didn't lie. I didn't dramatize. I said, there were integrity issues in leadership. I followed internal procedures to address them. The board handled it appropriately. He nodded. We appreciate people who don't look away from problems. It was the first time in years I walked out of an office feeling like I hadn't had to sell a version of myself to fit the room. My last task before closing the chapter was administrative, cleaning up old files on my personal drive. I deleted duplicates, archived spreadsheets, organized folders. At the bottom sat a single PNG, a screenshot. 11:47 p.m. You're fired, effective immediately. I opened it once more, not to relive anything, but to acknowledge it. That sentence had once been a threat, a blade hanging over my career. Now it was something else entirely. Proof that the moment he tried to end my future was the exact moment he ended his own. I didn't print it. I didn't frame it. I didn't need to. I just moved it into a folder labeled Resolved. Then I closed my laptop, stepped outside, and breathed a full breath without checking my phone. Not victory, not revenge, just peace. The kind you earn when you finally stop playing someone else's game and start living your own.